Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. My name is Rebecca Sofer, and I'm so glad that you're here. This is Light After Loss, the monthly series that I host with 1 800 Flowers. They have been an amazing partner throughout the years, actually, to Modern Loss, which is a project that I helped start about 9 years ago to talk about loss and grief and the long arc of it all in a really open way, in a let it all hang out way, in a way that doesn't need to be relegated to the shadows or just a therapist's office or just a clergy person's office, but rather teasing it out so that we can talk about it in broad, broad daylight, the way that it's supposed to be talked about. Because along with all the good stuff in life, there's also really hard stuff. That's just the way that it is. And if we don't talk about the hard stuff, it's really hard to help each other through it. And I've just really appreciated that 1 800 Flowers throughout the years has been an incredible partner to Modern Loss. They have understood the mission of destigmatizing this kind of stuff, and a company that specializes in, mostly celebrations you think of or happy occasions would maybe not want to acknowledge this. But what I really love about them is that they get it. They get that life is not black and white, but rather one enormous shade of gray that has many different tones to it. So I'm really grateful that you're here and watching this. I encourage you to check out all the other episodes that we have done over the last couple of years. Each month I sit down with an expert in their field and just have a honest conversation. And that is what we're going to do right now. So without further ado, I would like to talk about this month's theme. October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. I think for the tens of thousands of families across the United States that are affected each year by this type of loss, every day is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. But as we do in this country, in this world, we like marking occasions to kind of give ourselves an excuse to talk about things openly and create awareness so that other people might get to learn a little bit about what it does feel like to go through something that someone else is going through. And hopefully, by extension, become a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more supportive, so that we can, again, hearkening back to pulling each other through difficult things. This was designated as a day in 1988 as a month to recognize the unique grief of bereaved parents and partners in an effort to demonstrate support to all of these families who are suffered through this type of tragic loss. And I believe from somebody who has been a part of and grown the Modern Loss community over the last many years that promoting awareness of these types of losses, which in our circles is still kind of known a bit as the silent sorrow, which is that these are types of losses that somehow are still taboo in certain circles to talk about, which is on top of a taboo that already kind of exists in our culture, which is talking openly about grief. So just imagine how isolating it can be. And if you are watching this and are one of those people, you know how isolating it can be. And so promoting the awareness of this loss, I think, not only increases the likelihood that grieving families will receive support and understanding, but also, of course, results in improved education and prevention efforts, which hopefully could ultimately reduce the incidence of these tragedies. And so I am really delighted to have a guest who I've respected for a very long time. Her work is astounding. She's grown an enormous community around this topic, and she's really cool too. So she kind of is the whole package. Her name is Erica McAfee, and she is the founder and head sister of Sisters in Loss, a maternal child health education company where Black women replace silence with storytelling around pregnancy and infant loss, the stigma and shame that comes with sharing loss stories, prevent Black women from achieving the healing they need to thrive in their new normal. And Sisters in Loss holds space to present loss and infertility stories in a resourceful, culturally acceptable way to assure Black women that they are not alone in this journey. And Erica, I mean, I think that just that description from your bio and your website says it all. People need to feel like they're not alone. Acknowledgement is so incredibly important in the healing process. If you don't feel acknowledged in something so hard, how can you even begin to start healing? Not getting over it, but at least just starting the healing process, right?
Absolutely. I think that, sometimes it's just putting one pants leg on at a time and stepping out on the day and just trying to navigate through what grief and healing and loss looks like and feels like as we try to thrive in this new normal, this new state of being that you're in once you go through a loss, or particularly a miscarriage or some form of infant or child loss, which we honor in October. So I'm excited that we're having this conversation.
So, well, first, I mean, I guess second of all, I should thank you so much for being with us today. I'm just so delighted. I'm like a huge fan. So this is like really exciting for me. I just love people who are eradicating stigmas and saying no thanks to taboos and just kind of like pushing right through them, because somebody's got to do it and you're doing it in this incredible way. So let me just ask you, well, first, let's just paint the picture of how widespread pregnancy and infant loss is in not just like, yes, the world, but particularly in the United States. It's so common. I feel like if you just look around in a crowded room, many people, about 1 in 4 pregnancies, right, end in miscarriage. Is that correct?
It is 15 to
That's a lot
20% of pregnancies end in a first trimester loss, meaning up until 14 weeks of pregnancy, someone may experience a loss, and it may be someone around you, maybe your friend or family member. Somebody went to your church, or it's one of your coworkers. They more than likely have experienced some form of pregnancy loss, a miscarriage, or some of the different forms of miscarriages. It's so very common.
It's so common. And I don't even think that I knew how common it was until I was at the age where my friends were starting to have kids. And I was also going through my own personal loss with my mother's death. And so there was a lot of death talk in my circles, and still is, because of what I do. And I feel like people they were very comfortable with me talking about it, because I was just talking about grief all the time. And I guess I was viewed as kind of like a safe space, a safe touch point to share. And so I can't believe how many friends revealed to me that they had had a miscarriage. Some of them had experienced stillbirths, which of course we all knew, because it was, very hard to hide something like that. And I just couldn't believe how many of them told me this so far after the fact, because of the fact that they didn't feel like it mattered enough, because they were just quote unquote barely pregnant. So what right did they have to grieve? It's not like they had a baby. It's not like there was an actual death. And yet what they were feeling was grief, because it was grief. And I think, like, just to talk about just some more statistics before we get into this, in the US, tell me a little bit about the rate of stillbirth, which is something that, of course, like, we call these things like the unimaginable, but we can't do that because they are imaginable. They happen to people every day.
Every single day. And stillbirth rates are very similar, that it's very common that stillbirths happen. Stillbirths are typically what they would consider any loss that's greater than 20 weeks gestation. And for babies who are born still or born after 20 weeks, it depends on how they are birthed. But they typically are going to go through some form of lactation and postpartum, which a lot of people don't realize. If you lose a baby, that your body's not going to go through those same hormonal changes, but it really does. And I always tell everyone that every loss is a birth, and that we have to treat it as such. It's our duty to honor those babies in those spaces, even though they're no longer with us, and treat them the same as you would as if it was a live baby.
Yeah. And also give yourself the compassion that your whole body is going through a loss, right? Like, you're literally going through the postpartum phase with empty arms, which
Correct.
is
Coupled
just
with grief, right? So
coupled with grief.
And that's something that a lot of people don't really acknowledge, is that, yes, you may be experiencing some of those perinatal and mood and anxiety disorders like postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression, but you're also grieving, and your
Right.
whole body's grieving because now you're going through all these hormonal changes in the postpartum. You may be lactating and not knowing what to do with this milk because that milk was supposed to be for this baby. And now you have to couple all of that with grief and
Right.
try to move forward. It's very
Right.
difficult. It's a very difficult time, and how it all collides for individuals as they go through that. And it's not just the birthing person; it's the couple, right? It's the whole
Exactly.
family who's
It's the
going
whole
through
family.
who's going through these changes. The physical changes is obviously the birthing person, but everyone around them are feeling them. No different than you were talking about with your friends that were there with you, supporting like your mom, and then you're there to supporting them as they're going through their stillbirth. Everyone's there feeling the feels of what it feels like to live life now with this expectation that was there. Now it's no longer there physically.
Exactly. I mean, it's like what we would say. I mean, I would use a stronger word if this were in Facebook, but the crummiest sandwich. It's like the crummiest prize that you could possibly get is everything that you described, which is just like the convergence of all of these awful, very hard things. Now, the rate of SIDS, let's just talk about SIDS and infant loss within 24 hours birth, just to give some statistics, because again, I just think that for people who really haven't encountered this kind of topic before, it's important for people to understand like the numbers are real.
Yeah, sudden infant death syndrome is something that can be prevented. We do have some causes. There was a recent research study that came out about a couple months ago that really talked about some of the different causes for SIDS. Mm-hmm. SIDS typically can happen up to from 24 hours post-birth up until a year of life. The first year postpartum for babies who may have some difficulties breathing, maybe sleeping on their stomach, which traditionally where a lot of these babies are found and ended up passing away in their sleep. Or, what they recommend is that we do safe sleep methods and we sleep, we put babies on their backs so that they can sleep comfortably in that manner to prevent sudden infant death syndrome from happening for babies and to prevent this infant and child loss.
So these are very, real numbers. And I'm just curious as to, I'll just ask an obvious question. Anybody listening to this would be like, wow, like 1 in 4 pregnancies ended miscarriage. Look at all the same rate for stillbirth. So why is it? I mean, I just can't understand. Why is it that it's still so uncomfortable to talk about in open conversation?
Because grief is messy.
Mm-hmm.
It's messy. We don't
have to say that again.
We talk about all the rainbows and the sunshine and the unicorns and all of the things, but we don't talk about death. We don't deal with death and hard news well. It's just it's a cultural thing, really. As people, as humans, I would even go down to say as Americans, like it's very cultural to what we do and how we carry ourselves, where we feel like we can't talk about the inevitable when we know that's the inevitable of all of our lives. We're going to all face some form of loss at some point in our life. Obviously we're talking about infant and child loss and miscarriage, which is a different kind of loss, but it still has the same impact on yourself, your partner, your family members, your friends. How do you navigate life and move forward with loss? Because you don't lose it, it stays with you. You carry it. You just learn how to move through life and move through what your healing journey may look like. And it's a journey. It's nothing that happens overnight. It's something that we do every single day, and we face our grief really every single day, and just take, really acknowledge, do I want to take this next step on what that journey may look like? And sometimes you may fall back, sometimes you may move forward, but it is truly a life journey. But grief is messy. And I don't know if we really acknowledge how human forms are supposed to live with grief and death all of the time. And we don't really talk about how we show up for each other in those spaces. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really why you don't hear us talk a lot about it, even though it's so common. And then the other side of it is that not necessarily us having conversations about it. I don't know if people know the right things to say in these spaces either. So even think of, someone delivering the bad news that a loved one passed away, and acknowledging and trying to be empathetic and compassionate towards you, and not trying to trigger you, is very difficult to do. So I don't know if people have the language or the vernacular to say those things.
Right. We're
So
still writing. We're still writing the lexicon of grief, of loss in our culture, because there is a lexicon. It's just full of a lot of platitudes.
Exactly.
And ones that are, I would say, very germane to modern loss community members who I know. In addition to the general platitudes, are things like, you can always get pregnant again.
Exactly.
At least you have a healthy you have 2 healthy kids.
All right.
Erica, what would you say to that? If somebody said something like that to you, besides like the visceral internal reaction of what you'd really want to say to them, no, really, like, how does that make someone feel when they're told that?
You are adding, actual placers of what things could have happened and not acknowledging what actually occurred. And for a lot of individuals, when they hear that, you're dismissing the actual baby that they had and not acknowledging that they were pregnant, that they did give birth, even though the baby was lost, that they went through this full experience. And furthermore, you're not acknowledging that they're a parent, that they're a mother, that they're a father, that they've actually gone through this journey. So, no, those those comments are very, very dismantling, and it will put defenses up of people, where people will feel like, oh my gosh, this person really doesn't care about exactly what I experienced. Furthermore, they don't really understand what I'm going through. They don't understand the feelings that I'm feeling right now. And I would say to those individuals who use those type of that language, or, that commonplace talk that we normally do in these circumstances, is to just sit with it and sit back and think about how you would feel in those situations. And for, individuals who are on the other side who may have experienced loss, I would just tell them to be honest about their feelings to those individuals. Tell them that, I did lose a baby and it hurts, for you to say, the comment that you made, it hurts because you're not acknowledging my baby, you're not acknowledging me being a mother or a father or a parent, and you're not acknowledging my true feelings in this moment of the fact that I just lost a baby. Or even if you lost a baby 10 years ago, it's still that acknowledgement that you still will feel or want to feel in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. I mean, I think that it is unfortunate that the onus does fall upon the grievers much of the time to kind of speak up, but it kind of is the truth. It is, because, as we were saying, we have not normalized talk about grief. And especially on top of that, we haven't normalized talking about this particular type of losses, which is why it is like the taboo times 2 and shouldn't be. And if you are saying things like, you can always get pregnant again, I'm not actually saying that you're a bad person. You're not. You're probably a great person. You're trying to provide some support. You're trying to provide meaningful support. The problem is that society hasn't educated you on what meaningful support is. So you're regurgitating these things that you hear all the time, and it's not going to fly. I mean, we might as well, right? Like, Erica, give the tough love to people who say this stuff and just say, it's not going to work. It never will. And so just sit back. I think that's great advice, like for empathy, to just imagine how you might feel. And then when you think it's unimaginable, that's because it's so painful. So just imagine how much pain the person who's actually going through it directly is experiencing. I want to get into a little bit, I definitely want to talk about the disparities of these losses as they relate to the BIPOC population, right? Can you just tell me a little bit about this? I mean, I feel like I read in the United States, Black women are 4 to 5 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes. Is that correct?
That is very correct. So this is pregnancy-related causes up until the first year postpartum. So what many people may know or may have heard of, this maternal mortality rate that's happening in the U.S. So that means almost 800 women a year are dying due to these pregnancy related causes up until the first year postpartum, due to negligence in our healthcare system. And particularly for Black women and women of color, where they're not being seen, they're not being heard, they're not being valued, they're not being respected in these spaces. So when they speak up and say something, a lot of their acknowledgement of their pain or the issues that they may be having is getting dismissed. A prime example of this was Serena Williams when she had her daughter about 3 or 4 years ago. Serena Williams, the greatest of all time. She felt like she was having issues breathing and had to fight and advocate for herself, So, and if, in order for them to actually literally go and actually do a chest x-ray to find out she was having a pulmonary embolism and almost could have lost her life if she didn't advocate for herself.
It's just really, it's infuriating. I wanted to say sad, but more than that, it's just infuriating because so much of this, like you say, is about people not listening. Mm-hmm. And if we just listened, I mean, we know our bodies. And we know our bodies. And so when we speak up, we should be listened to. How does the maternal mortality rate translate into disparities with prenatal care that results in the miscarriage rate being higher in these populations, stillbirth rate being higher? I just think that's important
Absolutely.
to know about as well.
There is research out there that has shown and done studies, particularly on the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community, to really acknowledge and understand exactly what's happening in that perinatal period, and if they are still getting that same quality of care that may result in losses. So social economic isn't a factor, educational level isn't a factor, access to care really isn't a factor. It really boils down to just not being trusted in those settings.
I hope that our conversation can result in at least somebody who has, I think we all have the power to enact change.
We really do.
And I really do hope that our conversation will have that effect on people and they realize, I mean, we're so busy, we're overwhelmed. We've been in 3 years almost of a pandemic. Life is hard. I get it. It's hard for all of us in our day-to-day. But it's still important that we learn how other people are being affected by things disproportionately or unfairly, because we do have a responsibility in the world to make it a better place. I do believe that. I don't care how Pollyanna-ish it sounds. And I'm curious, we just have a couple of minutes left. I would love to know your tips, and this is something we could talk about till the cows come home, on how do you support people, right? Not just mothers, like you say, partners are affected by these losses too. And I think that they are overlooked, sometimes when it comes to this, and they're tasked with supporting the person who was carrying the baby. I mean, it's a lot. It's a big mess. There's a lot going on. So what are some tips to support people going through, these types of losses? I know in the modern loss community, there's a lot of people who just say, please ask me my baby's name. I don't care if I was 14 weeks pregnant. Ask me if they had a name. Ask me to say it out loud. And to me, that just makes so much sense because both of my parents are dead and I don't get to say their names that much, but they existed. They had lives. They had full lives for many decades. And so at least there are people who knew them. So every so often, their name just is uttered out loud. These people who have infant loss, pregnancy loss, they don't get that opportunity.
No, they don't. I love that, acknowledging the names. And I also would say acknowledge that they are parents.
Uh-huh.
So even, especially if you have friends or family members who have had a loss, and Mother's Day and Father's Day comes around, and the holidays come around, that you acknowledge that they were parents and that they still are parents. They just are parenting children differently. Their children are in heaven. They aren't physically here on earth. So acknowledging that they're parents, but acknowledging that they're grieving too, that this is a process and that you're giving them grace as they go through their grieving process, and not expecting that your friend, your loved one is going to be the same as they were, because grief is messy. Grief is not linear. The process of getting to some form of healing is different for everyone, and it takes time. Right. it takes time
Right.
for everyone. So really, really help them help or acknowledge that they're parents. I think that's a big part of a way to
So big.
ensure,
It's like an
ensure that those
identity, like
individuals are
need
supported.
to give them outside legitimacy to their identity that you are a
Mhm.
mother no matter what. And I think it really helps. Another thing that that people have told me in our community, within our community, is that, they have learned when they are asked, I think sometimes people have a visceral reaction to, oh, how many kids do you have? If you have two living children, I think that, society would like you to say, I have two kids. But if you've
Mhm.
had a miscarriage, if you've had a stillbirth, whatever, if you've had an elected end to your pregnancy, it does help people eventually to allow themselves to say, well, I have three children, two are living.
Mhm.
I mean, it really does. And I see that on the bios of people who follow Modern Loss on Instagram. It forces people to witness the fact that the at least idea of this person existed, or this person existed for a certain period of time, and they're not forgotten. And the identity isn't changed just because they're no longer here.
Yes, absolutely.
One last question before we go. And again, literally, like, how many hours could we talk about this for? Even one person, like I said, I feel like has the potential to create change. What are a couple ways in which people can get involved to, let's say they're listening to the conversation and they're like, okay, that does not sound right, that the maternal mortality rate in women of color is this disproportionate. I don't like that, or I don't like that this is the rate of miscarriage. Like, I would like to feel like I have some sort of power over making things a little better. What can they do? What can we do?
Absolutely. First thing, there are several nonprofits that are probably local to you that you can support that focus on pregnancy and infant loss awareness, on support, and are doing things in a community to support these individuals, birthing people, as well as the parents and even grandparents on how to navigate through grief and loss. So do your Googles, search some local support groups. You can just put in pregnancy and infant loss in your state, your city and state, and see what nonprofits come up. And I'm pretty sure this month in October, they're going to probably have some form of a walk or a balloon release or something during the holidays to acknowledge grief and loss.
Mm,
So that's something that you can do locally to support.
right. And the United States to this date still does not have a national bereavement leave policy.
It does not.
I believe it only does reference miscarriage and certain pregnancy related losses because that
Right.
is a medical condition. However, it's not like it's that much to phone home about. So I do think we can get a lot better. This isn't even a political statement. This is a human statement.
Human
We
state.
all have, but loss crosses all lines. Grief
It
is the
does.
great leveler. Grief doesn't care. It just affects everybody. And so if you want to make it easier and have somebody who is walking down this path feel a little bit less lonely and a little bit more supported, and experience that no matter what is individual, then get involved. Like, even showing up for a walk, like you said, I like that. Just like showing up, see people there, see,
Mhm.
like, so that people can look up and say, oh, there's an ally.
Yep.
Allyship is so important. It's so important, especially in these types of conversations, which are still very like othered.
Yep. Absolutely.
Erica McAfee, I think you're amazing. I think you're wonderful. Congratulations on everything that you have built. We will be linking to your page in this Facebook chat. I hope that anybody who is watching feels free to put your questions and comments
Yes.
in the comments section. Both Erica and I will be hopping in there to respond. If you would like to say the name of somebody or like to share your story, please do. Please do. Like, let us be your witness here. Witnessing is so important. And before I say goodbye, Erica, one last question. What would you say? You're someone out there is watching, feeling lonely, feeling, like they're struggling with a pregnancy loss or an infant loss. What's your biggest piece of advice for them in terms of how to feel seen, how to feel pulled in, how to pull each other in?
I would say to find community. The one thing that I love about social media is that we get to be connected, like with Modern Loss and even in Sisters in Loss, that we can find our community. So find your community. It may not be in your group of friends or even in your family, especially if you are navigating this journey. It's a new sisterhood and parenthood that we are a part of that we probably never thought we would be. So find your community. And once you find them, hold on to them and learn from them, as we're all still navigating through grief and loss and what healing looks like for us. But you're not alone. We're out there. We're here virtually. So come find us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you to everybody who watched. And please, if you watch this and know somebody in your life who could stand to listen, to feel seen, or to learn as important, please share this with them. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Light After Loss. I'm Rebecca Sofer, and I will see you next time around.